vast majority of people on Medicaid are already working. And so I think it's a little bit of a distraction from the issue and the billions of dollars of cuts that are made both there as well as food benefits with SNAP and TANF for hardworking Americans who are just trying to get by. And in exchange for what? In exchange for ballooning our deficit and for one of the largest wealth transfers from the working class to the ultra wealthy in this country. And so we're seeing that again now, where there's a lack of desire to come together during the shutdown and extend the subsidies for almost 20 million Americans who rely on those subsidies to make healthcare affordable. I mean, we're staring at up to $3,000 tax increase, because that's what it is. If we don't act, we're going to raise taxes on hardworking Americans across this country. In addition to people who are lucky enough to have an employer-based healthcare plan, those rates are going to go up too.
All right, joining me now, representing the 2nd District out there in Maryland, a friend of the show, Congressman Johnny Olszewski. You can call him Congressman Johnny O. Congressman Mike Leon, good to see you again.
Mike, great to see you.
You know, Congressman, there's a bunch to get to, and you and I last spoke in the summertime. Now we're here almost at the end of the year, around the holiday season. This is the first question that I just thought of because, we've recently had a couple folks on in the independent media space that they follow the Trump administration and all the news coming out of the Trump administration. When the government was shut down and all of this different information now is coming out every single day, there's either, whether it be Epstein file stuff, Trump wants to invade Nigeria, there's boats being blown up in Venezuela. How do you process information? How do you and your staff sit there daily and say, what's happening today? Like, what's going on today? How are you guys digesting the news the way we are digesting the news?
Very intentionally. I have a great staff, and they do a very thorough job of doing basically a digest of what is coming through that day. I think to your point and to your question, it's really unprecedented, the deluge of activity from this administration, not always consistent with norms or laws necessarily even. But I know that we are trying to do our very best to sort of keep up with what's happening and really focus in the areas where we can make a difference. And for me, it's democracy, decency, and affordability are really areas that I've tried to hone in on. I certainly am supporting my colleagues in the areas of foreign affairs. I serve on that committee, for example, and signing on to War Powers Act with some of these global activities that this administration has taken, but also just remembering that we can only do so much in a given day, and that it's incumbent upon us to really use our gifts and our skills where they're best utilized. And so we take our time every morning. We go through what's coming down the pike and try to make a decision about how we can best respond to what this administration is doing out there.
Well, you just said coming down the pike, and you mentioned about the War Powers Act. So let me wander there first for the first question, which is really about what we've seen recently with these boats being struck. Some down here in the Caribbean, where I live down in Miami. In other areas, the Trump administration has been doing this, claiming this war on these narco terrorists. Secretary Marco Rubio designating some of them as terrorists. What do you make of not only the acts that are happening right now, because the pushback is always Democrats' side on the side of drug dealers. And that's not really the case. The case is really about, we don't know enough information about who is on these boats. And this is kind of circumventing what Congress's responsibility is. How do you answer that? How do you tackle that? And seeing what the president is doing with response to all this?
I'm a big believer, Mike, that we have to lead with values. And so I think that I can say with confidence in any group, whether it's Democrats or Republicans or anywhere in between, that look, I believe in the rule of law. And I think Republicans and Democrats alike can agree to that concept. I believe that we should be doing all that we can to fight drug cartels and intercept boats and hold people accountable who are doing that activity. And so when you sort of start with those two values, the rule of law dictates that we handle how we fight the cartels a certain way. And so if we are missing resources to intercept these boats, to make sure people are prosecuted and put in jail for a very long time for trafficking drugs, it is a very serious problem. And we should be taking action about it. But to indiscriminately target what may be or has been, said as fishermen or innocent individuals, my question is always, if we don't follow the rule of law in any given case, what stops it when it's your family or your friends or someone you know, and irrespective of the situation, right? And so that is the whole point of creating these standards, of having policies and procedures and law on these issues so that we are following. That's why I've signed on to several war power resolution acts, because Congress does have the responsibility to make sure that we're not indiscriminately attacking countries, going to war. And so I think that the Trump administration is on very shaky legal ground with what they're trying to do with these attacks. Again, but that doesn't mean that Democrats are supportive of drug cartels. We're not. And if there is a need to invest more resources or put more support behind that, then we can do that. And if in fact military action is justified, then let's have the Trump administration come to the table, be transparent about who are on these boats, why this is the only way they could do it versus doing an interception, for example, and a prosecution.
Let me ask you a follow up to that. Normally in the business sense, you'll have the, all right, these are the next steps type of meeting, right? And we'll meet in a couple of weeks. So what are the next steps in that case for the people that are following this right now? Because it seems like, from the words of the Secretary of War, Hegseth, that they're just going to keep doing this indiscriminately. Like, they're not going to listen to what you're saying, what Congresswoman Stansbury tweeted out to him recently about, hey, you got to run this through Congress. So if they keep doing that, what's the next thing what's the next action in line that should be done?
Congress has a responsibility. That is how the framers created our government, is to be co-equal branches. We're supposed to hold the executive branch accountable if they overstep their authority. And so we're going to keep pushing for that accountability and that process through things like war power resolution. We're going to keep pushing through letters. We're going to keep calling in not just the Congress, but also the courts and in the community, and encouraging Americans to call into the representatives and senators who are supporting this without really giving it any thorough review, basically giving the president a blank check to do whatever he wants on military targets, creating military targets. Again, we don't know if these are combatants, innocent civilians, et cetera. So I will say, though, if Americans are frustrated with the lack of oversight, the lack of accountability, that the best way to do that is to be organized. We're now less than a year away from the next election. And so being in a place where you have your voices heard in Congress's ability to do or not do something is where voters will ultimately, it's the ultimate expression of someone's opinion. But in the meantime, I think engaging with that process to say to representatives, like, thank you for pushing the administration, or in the cases where senators and congresspersons are not, say, why aren't you holding the Trump administration accountable here?
This episode of Can We Please Talk is presented by our friends over at Fresh Roasted Coffee. Delicious tasting coffee since 2009. They've been our proud sponsor. You see the promo code there. Look at this. They sent me this beautiful kit right here. Listen to that. Listen to that seal coming out, right? What's in it? Environmentally safe, compostable K-Pods. I love the dark Mexican blend. You can go to their website right now, take the quiz. That quiz is going to put you with a flavor profile. Listen to that sound of the coffee that you're going to be matched up with. Go to freshroastedcoffee.com. Click the link right now in our show notes. You can see it right there. Click that link. It's going to take you to the site. When you get to checkout, use our promo code, Can We Please Get 20, all one word, Can We Please Get 20, 20. You're going to get 20% off your first purchase. Head to freshroastedcoffee.com, our official sponsor of the Can We Please Talk podcast. Congressman, I want to pivot over to the government shutdown that is now obviously, again, a continuing resolution being signed. And now we're going to be in this fight for funding the government in 2026. I want to play something that one of your fellow congresswomen said there. And I want to get your reaction on the other side. So take a listen to this.
Documentation that showed you $410 billion that we appropriated, Democrats, Republicans signed into law by the President of the United States. And that money has been terminated. It has been delayed. And it's $410 billion. I'll give you the tracker. It's about 25 or 26 pages. And you can go down and take a look at every appropriations bill, and you can find out what program has been terminated, what's been gone. And that since January has nothing to do with this crisis that the Republicans have initiated and shutting down the government because they don't want to negotiate on health care costs.
So that was Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro. And, you and I were talking about this off air, and we've been talking about it actually in the summer as well, about healthcare, affordability, these issues. Now here we are, the government shutdown is finally over. I would love to get first your opinion on what she said there and what she's kind of explaining there about what the Trump administration is doing with these funds. But the second part is the shutdown was about a certain thing. And Republicans' argument was always that they're not negotiating with us, sign this clean CR, and then we'll renegotiate in good faith. And then everything will be back to normal and the budget will be set for January in the fiscal 26. You're smirking right now for people watching us on YouTube. That's not the case. So explain a little bit of what she was saying and about the fight in totality of why the government was shut down.
Yeah, I'm smirking because, as you point out, where we're leading towards, that's just not the case here. And it was all just a bunch of bunk that were being fed to the American public. So Rosa pointed out, and she's a great fiscal leader, understands these issues inside and out. She pointed out one of three fundamental flaws with the continuing resolution legislation. And really, the point she was making primarily is that was not a clean continuing resolution. And it wasn't clean because it's not a continuation of what was already agreed upon in a bipartisan fashion. The prior budget, which most CRs just continue funding at existing levels, keep funding that was in place. This president unilaterally went back and, as Rosa said, cut billions and billions and billions of dollars of funding across this country, sometimes with the support of just Republicans, so not in a bipartisan fashion, sometimes on his own, I think illegally through things like pocket rescissions, and in other ways just pulling back funding where he targeted Democratic-led states and Democratic-led districts on energy projects. So for me, it was like, if we don't have protections against more cuts by the president, by himself, it's not a bipartisan budget. It's not a clean resolution. And it's not worth the paper it's written on. So Rosa made some great points there. In addition to that point, there are two other issues that came up in the debate. One is the healthcare piece, and it is a huge issue on affordability that's crushing Americans. In Maryland, the average family of four will pay over $4,000 a year more if they are on the Affordable Care Act, and that is crushing for a working family. It's an average family of four making under $100,000 a year. That's a lot of money to any working family in Maryland, and similar increases are happening across the country. If you're lucky enough to have private insurance, you're going to see your premiums go up 10, 15, 20% too, even if it's through an employer. So this is going to affect all Americans. This is a president who promised to lower costs on day one. We're now almost a year in. We've done absolutely nothing to lower costs, especially on healthcare. So that's issue number two. Issue number three was corruption was written explicitly into the legislation by the Senate at the end. The senators gave themselves 8 members of the Senate alone, and only the Senate, were able to get $1 million payout because they had their phones legally subpoenaed. The records, not phone tapped, their phone records were legally subpoenaed by a grand jury of their peers because of their involvement with the January 6th insurrection. It is corruption at the highest form. It is written into law. Normally, someone has to break the law. This was the Senate writing corruption into the law, and House members and Republicans specifically going along with it. Now, we just passed a unanimous bill that would undo it to make, I guess, those Republicans feel better, but they should have taken that out before we sent the resolution back to the Senate. We could have. We offered an amendment to do that, to fix healthcare, to put in those guardrails, but there's not a spirit of bipartisanship here. This was about jamming this bill through and doing exactly what Republicans wanted, and to your point, now not negotiating on healthcare at all.
Right. We're going to see how that plays out over the next few weeks and months. Speaking of corruption at the highest order, you walked right into that, which is about the Jeffrey Epstein stuff. You and I, when you came on in the summer, we were talking about this. Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie had introduced that bill. Now the bill has passed, obviously, 429 to 1, I believe it was. Yep. We know who the one was. And I've been pointing it out, too, by the way. But the president signed this, this bill. And I'm just curious from your perspective, from where we spoke last in the summer about this to now, the focal point should always be about the victims here and everything that they're going through. To those out there that are detractors, all on my Twitter feed about this is all distraction, all these people that for years we're talking about releasing this stuff. And now their guy happens to be at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And now they're like, oh, this is all distraction. It's a Democratic hoax. It keeps moving every single day, like Lamar Jackson in the pocket. So you can't really pinpoint what they're going to say day to day. But what would you say to those folks now that we have this signed, and what are the next steps, like we talked about before, with respect to the Epstein files and the release?
Yeah, we've come a long way since we talked last. I had a very powerful vigil with survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's sexual violence. And we got to remember, we're talking about children who were sexually exploited, and we're defending the rich and the powerful by not releasing these files. And so I'm glad that we're making progress. As you pointed out, past the House, past the Senate, only one person, either chamber, voted no. The president has signed it, a huge reversal from what he had said before. 180, he was the one calling it a hoax. Now he's supporting it. So the next steps are the president has 30 days to release the files. And I, unfortunately, am still a little suspicious of a president who spent the better half of the year calling it a hoax, fighting against the release, pulling in Lauren Boebert to the Situation Room to say, you got to remove your name for this discharge petition before he said, okay, now you all vote for it. I'm worried that these sort of sham investigations that he announced at the last second, and Democrats only, by the way, directing Pam Bondi to go and investigate Democrats who might be associated. And I'm for that. I'm for investigating all of the people and holding all of the individuals accountable. But there's a provision in the law that we just passed and the president just signed that says an active investigation is one excuse not to. Now, you still can, but I'm worried that this president's going to hide behind that provision and say, oh, sorry, there's an investigation into these terrible Democrats. I can't release it. What I'll say is, first, that's wrong. But secondly, the president, we know, is in there 1,600 times at least. So if he's done nothing wrong, like he said, he's not investigating himself currently. My advice and my encouragement, my challenge to the president is release all of the references to you, Mr. President, in those files so that we can be clear without a shadow of a doubt, if you've done nothing wrong, that you are truly innocent and not involved in Mr. Epstein's sexual violence against young children.
You know, Congressman, you alluded to the 2026 midterms. So I want to ask you a question about that, but also looking back at what happened in the 25 election cycle here, the Prop 50 on California's ballot. You had obviously Abigail Spanberger, Mikey Sherrill winning the governor races. We have Zohran Mamdani in New York City and what happened there. I know a lot of people have thrown cold water on it. Blue people won in blue states, right? And there's a little bit of truth in that, but there's also, in terms of voter turnout and how many people turned out for this election, that you can kind of, at least pull something from there. What did you make of what happened a few weeks ago on election night and the message that sent? Let's start there first with what happened in 25.
Democrats won, and they won overwhelmingly. They outperformed recent presidential, recent gubernatorial outcomes. You got to remember, Virginia elected a Republican just 4 years ago. So it's not a blue state Virginia will elect Republican. And to see what Governor-elect Spanberger did there, not just winning, but winning so convincingly, to see the margin that Mikey Sherrill grew her margins over the last election for reelecting the governor there in New Jersey. New Jersey went for President Trump last election. These are not, true blue, dyed-in-the-wool states. These are states that will go based on the issues. And so I think the fact that they won there, you see races in Pennsylvania and statewide races in Georgia. I think it was the first time statewide candidate in Georgia who wasn't for the U.S. Senate actually won. I think it shows that, affordability matters. These are candidates who laser focused on the issue of affordability, something I've been talking about since coming to Congress. We've done nothing here, but they talked about it. And I think Republican inaction played a role. And then I think Republican extremism, the extreme approach that this president is taking on any number of issues, including not acting on healthcare, I think played a major role in voters turning away. And so I think the lesson for Democrats is we have to take that to heart and continue to advance a common sense, a decency, a democracy, and that affordability agenda, as I was saying earlier, and not lose focus on that. Because if people can't feed their kids, and if they can't afford to put a roof over their heads, it's hard to win on any of the other issues. And so I think we need to really stay focused on this affordability issues. Republicans are making life more expensive every day, and Democrats need to prove that we're both fighting against that, but also that we're going to be for things that make life more affordable if and when we take over the House of Representatives and maybe the Senate.
Congressman, before I let you go, let's look ahead to 2026. Obviously, we're approaching towards the end here of the holiday season in 25. The issues of 24 in the election that maybe cost Kamala Harris, let's say, even in that transition period. We saw some of it outlined in Dearborn, Michigan, the war in Gaza. 25, like you mentioned, a lot of the affordability stuff, right? Trump is back in office. And now things are still more expensive, and he hasn't fulfilled his campaign promises. But as we go into 26, what other issues could you potentially see that could be landmines for candidates like yourself, other Democratic officials? I mean, Congressman Seth Moulton, who's been on this show before, recently outlined something with AIPAC and donations. And he's like, I'm giving that back. I don't even want to deal with that. And that issue that it's caused. And the war in Gaza, again, even though President Trump has gotten this ceasefire, maybe that will still pester into 26. And I hate even using that word in the connotation. The war in Ukraine, there's still outstanding wars and conflicts that are happening, and things are still unaffordable. So for 26, continuing what do you think will be some of those central issues that will play out in 26, or is it too early to tell right now?
I mean, I think affordability is going to absolutely be on the agenda and top of mind for Americans across this country. 26 for sure. It's hard to say what might evolve between now and then. Who knows what happens with the Epstein files, for example. But what I will say is, I think we also have an obligation as members of Congress to understand our communities and understand whether it's a workforce issue or issues with our farmers or our small towns, issues with housing that we are listening to. And I think there's going to be issues that are very particular to our district. And the best members of Congress, I think, are super connected to the people they represent and understand at a hyper local level what some of the issues are. You know, for me, we are dealing, for example, with the rebuild of the Francis Scott Key Bridge, ensuring that the funding stays in place. That is a project that is done safely, quickly as possible, as affordably as possible. Probably the largest infrastructure project in Maryland, if not the East Coast. So like not forgetting about things like that while also going into a smaller towns in Carroll County that I represent. Like I was at Pawnee and just staying connected, right? And hearing from people about what their concerns and fears are. And then showing the people we represent and showing public writ large that we're not beholden to any donors or special interests. And we should do that by how we conduct ourselves in office. You know, unfortunately, there have been a slew of resolutions and censures, and that reflects poorly on the entire body. And so I think how we conduct ourselves, the positions we take, being engaged, the town halls that we conduct. I mean, we've done probably over a dozen town hall and public opportunities. People are hungry for that. And I think that both Democrats and Republicans alike, who both are focused on affordability and engage with the public, are going to do well. And I think, again, just that common sense approach where we're not going to be super extreme. I think Republicans are in a tough spot because they are so beholden to Donald Trump. Republicans are waiting to hear what to do next. You know, they're not responding to the news of the day. They're waiting to be told what to say about the news of the day. And it's usually like the president's right. But I think that will backfire. And it sort of gets away from that authenticity and then away from that connectedness, which is why you see thousands of people showing up when Republicans have town halls, questioning and criticizing them on everything from affordability to healthcare. Yeah.
Congressman, I can't thank you enough for hopping on the program. Congressman Johnny O, 2nd District out in Maryland. You can go to Olszewski.house.gov. You like the way I said that? Olszewski.house.gov if you want to reach out to the congressman. I can't thank you enough for hopping on the program. Happy holidays to you and your family and continued success. Please stay safe.
And to you, Mike. Thanks so much.
This vacation offer is so good, I'm going to repeat it. If you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, even up to the 80s, come to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico for 6 days. All meals included for only $2.99. Again, come to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. All meals, all drinks, $2.99. We'll even give you a free cruise or land package if you're one of the first 50 people to call right now. Again, come to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico for only $2.99. Be one of the first 50 50 people to book right now at our luxurious, all-inclusive resort. If you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, even up to the 80s, you deserve a great vacation. So take it right now. Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. Call now and get a free cruiser land package on top of your trip.
Call 877-635-4021. That's 877-635-4021. 877-635-4021.
Hey everybody, Mike Leon from the Can We Please Talk podcast. Thank you so much for watching this clip. Do me a favor, hit subscribe. Gonna get more content from us over at Can We Please Talk.